Men are not toxic. Men are the answer. Welcome to the ReMasculation Podcast. I'm very excited to welcome to the show today my dear brother, Joshua Hathaway, M.A. Joshua stewards a growing regenerative learning village on the Big Island of Hawaii, where he is experimenting with innovative and regenerative land, food, and cultural sovereignty practices. Through his unique transmission of collective trauma healing, tantric reconciliation, and collaborative leadership, and a deep lineage of indigenous ways, he is activating the codes of a more coherent and evolved humanity in every person and group he encounters. He is devoted to growing a new heaven and a new earth right here in the fertile soil of our actual relationships, and transmuting all of our ancestral pain into medicine in the flames of alchemical intimacy. It's a beautiful mouthful, my friends. Welcome to the show.
Oh, brother, aloha from Hawaii, man. It's such a pleasure to be with you, Michael. Thank you for another opportunity just to drop in and talk about something that matters so much to both of us. And yeah, so grateful to be here, bro.
So excited to have you, and really excited to lean in some edges in the conversation today. We're going to be talking about violence. We're going to be talking about the definitions of violence. Violence in its more traditionally known masculine form, the physical aspect of violence, the physicality of violence. But we're talking about it in its more essential feminine form as well, which is emotional violence, which is manipulation. We're going to be talking about the unintended consequences of feminism. We're going to be talking toxic femininity and what that looks like up against these ideas of toxic masculinity, patriarchy, and all of these sort of blanket isms that are being thrown around, I think, to everyone's peril. We're going to give them their due and explore what's underneath them that I think all of us can agree. There's been certainly some challenging experiences in the history of human beings, and where we are now and how we can start to unpack these notions to connect back to taking each other as individuals rather than as just collectives of people lumped into groups. And also looking at the value of groups and all these kind of things. So we're going to get all over the place here a bit, but I'm just excited to jump in with you today, Joshua, and excited to start. So let's jump in.
Yeah, man. Well, as you said, some of the themes of this conversation that we're going to have around this story that I want to share about my own life, which, in my experience, I don't need to look any further than my life to see all of the archetypes playing out. My life is the greatest story that I've ever fucking read. Like, it's amazing. It's so rich to lean back and get to witness and see all the allegories and symbols and all of these archetypal and collective patterns playing out in my life, right? But today's theme is about violence. What is violence, right? Where does it come from? How does it replicate itself? Which we can't have that conversation without talking about trauma, because violence is always the result of some form of unresolved trauma, right? And violence takes all these different forms. And in talking about this, it's pretty certain that somebody who's going to be listening is going to get triggered. And so we also have to talk about cognitive dissonance here and talk about what happens when you hear data that might not line up with your own belief system, and whether you take that data in and let it itch inside of the incongruence, just itch inside of you and let it kind of like foster a greater and more diverse understanding of something, or whether you dismiss the data or you attack the deliverer of the data in order to restore a sense of like personal safety in a paradigm that's now unchallenged, right? So
sure,
let your paradigm be challenged. The invitation here is like, everybody who's listening, let your paradigm be challenged, and like, let's look at this through this lens. And I promise you can put this lens down later. You put it down as soon as you're done and never pick it back up again. But while you're listening, please, like, just take the lens on for a moment and see if you can discover something new for yourself, and something that might enrich your ability to be an agent of peace,
yes,
and harmony,
yes,
and collaboration in our world, which is what we want. We don't want anybody in conflict, because the energy used in conflict could be better used 99.99% of the time in collaboration to get everybody's needs met.
That's right.
It's so
Yeah.
right.
And the importance of being able to understand that conflict can be done well and it can be done poorly. And conflict done well always results in more truth and more understanding, to the degree that people can hold that intensity of, I think I'm right, you think you're right. Let's actually dive into this with some parameters here to ensure that we can go as deep as we need to go and actually figure out, well, maybe you're right, Joshua. And maybe I've something I've been believing to be true actually isn't. Or maybe there's just a slant on it that I haven't looked at before. But again, one of my big purposes behind creating this content was my dislike of what I was seeing in the public discourse, rather the absence of conversations like this, where people are able to air their grievances in mature ways, talk about things. And this idea of there being topics that are just off limits that we can't talk about anymore is absolutely ludicrous to me. And I think we really divorce ourselves from that at our deep peril. And we're seeing it in our communities. And we're going to talk about yours today, some experiences that you've had, that you've seen personally, that you've witnessed. I may even share an anecdote or two of my own in that regard. But let's circle back to this sort of initial idea of violence, Joshua. And I'd love to grab your definition of it and see if that's a good place to jump in.
Yeah, absolutely. This definition that I carry of violence, comes from deep tradition of nonviolent communication, the lineage of Marshall Rosenberg, as well as my own Gong Fu lineage, as well as all of the sort of mindfulness-based practices that I have been studying and practicing and experimenting in for a couple of decades. And the essence is that violence is a violation of someone's consent. It's in the word, right? What is violence? It's a violation. What is being violated? What is being violated is my consent. I'm a sovereign being. So when you try to do with my body what I don't want done with my body, that's a violation of my consent, whether it's having sex with me or whether it's pushing me out of your way, or whether it's trying to force my body to be somewhere through threat, coercion, emotional manipulation of any kind, or to do something that it doesn't want to do. That's violence. And we inherit that. We understand that we violate somebody's core sovereignty when we demand anything of them, and when we take anything from them that they don't freely give, right? There's a form of violence inherent in something where you extract from somebody what they're not just freely giving. And so violence is a violation of consent at the core level. Right. And there are times when it's important for me to protect something that is under some form of attack by of some protective use of force, by moving somebody's body. I was in downtown Las Vegas a few years back, and I saw these two. I just happened around the corner. I was on a date with this beautiful girl, and happened around the corner as I saw these two guys starting to touch this other guy's girlfriend. And he was like, what? These two drunk guys were just trying to start something. And so these two guys he, of course, reacts and starts defending his girlfriend. These two guys start beating on him, right? 100 people sitting there waiting outside this club get their phones out, and they're just laughing. And I run into the street and I drag one of the guys off of him. And because I just wanted it to be a fair fight. I don't care if you guys need to work something out and you're both consenting to throwing some blows, go for it. But 2-on-1 is not a fair fight. So I'm just going to get in there and make sure one of those guys isn't able to get his fists on that guy. And I did that, and I just drew him away. Twice he tried to get back in, and I just pulled him off, and then he started coming at me, and I was like, good. I was just backing off. I'm like, I have no beef with you. I have no beef with you, And his last punch came around and just like kissed my nose. It was poetry in motion. And this guy was so drunk, I could have fucking dropped him in a split second, but it never even occurred to me to do that, because my intention was in no way violent. My intention was to protect everybody in the situation by applying the least amount of force possible to not damage anyone's bodies, and to support the least amount of damage happening overall in the whole situation. And after he swung at me and missed, the other two guys were finally kind of like walking away, I was like, you better go check out your buddy. And he turned around and walked off. Right. So in philosophy and in ethics, we have a term called passive injustice. Passive injustice is when you witness an injustice happening and you do nothing about it. And that means that you've participated in that injustice by doing nothing about it. You are complicit in the injustice that you witness when you do nothing about it. So these are all things that are important to kind of like help frame this story, right? Yeah. What is violence? And how does it escalate? Because it starts small. And if we only recognize violence at its most like outrageous and physically sort of masculine violent level, then we're never going to be able to catch it before it gets there at its seed, right? And that's where we need to become exquisite in our relationships, in our own hearts and minds, and in our communities to recognize violence in its seed form, and make sure that we sequester that and take care of that person who might be sort of compelled toward that kind of violence, and that we absolutely extract that violence from our own nature and our own selves as protectors of the world. Because I can't protect the world by attacking someone. That's not how it works. I protect by being an agent of peace in the world and protecting everyone from themselves and me first.
Yeah, let's unpack that a little bit. I mean, I heard you mention, physical violence and as a more masculine form of that, right? I know we talked about that, you and I, in our sort of riffs, but we're going to use these terms masculine and feminine, not necessarily to point only to men or only to women, but that generally they are employed more often by men and more often by women. So when we say a more masculine form of violence, we mean physical violence, the use of physical force to hit, punch, strike, take, rape, conquer, these type of ideas, right?
Yeah, I mean, and if it helps the person who's listening, you can replace the word masculine with yang. Yang is a pretty neutral word for most people. It doesn't carry a lot of charge, but in the martial arts tradition, in the Taoist tradition, there's two fundamental forces that are constantly in a dance with each other, represented by the diagram of the supreme ultimate, or the yin yang symbol. The white is the yang, the masculine energy, the penetrating energy, the intense, bright, open, direct energy. The dark is the yin, the feminine energy, the mysterious energy, the subtle energy, right? Both of these polarities, and life is played out in patterns of yin and yang, of masculine and feminine. It just so happens that you have the exact same ratio of mothers to fathers that I have, that everybody else has in this thing. We're all made up of exactly half and half, men and women. And every man, within every man, yin and yang are dancing. There's no thing that can live that is not dancing with these two polar forces. There's the intellect, yang, and there's the body and feeling, yin, right? Yeah. There are so many ways that when we learn how to identify this distinction in ourselves, we just become more masterful at applying polarity, because polarity can either be a source of electricity, right, or it can be the source of damage and conflict and disharmony, right? But when our inner masculine and feminine are in harmony with one another, then the body is healthy, the mind is alert and at ease, the emotions are smooth and peaceful and even joyous, even ecstatic, right? The thoughts are beautiful. They're balanced and harmonious. They're creative, even genius, right? But to the extent that one or the other polarity is dominant in a person, then we have toxicity in our system. If the masculine is too dominant, then we're too tight and we're too like forceful and we're too intense and we're too open and we're pushing through people's boundaries and not honoring people's sovereignty, right? This is masculine violence is open and direct. I'm gonna fucking come and I'm gonna hit you in the face. Like I'm coming at you. I'm right in front of you.
Yeah.
I want to address
power
this right
over
on.
someone. Yeah.
Feminine
direct.
violence.
Yeah.
power over, physical power over someone, explicit power over someone. Mm-hmm. Feminine violence is subtle power over someone. Feminine violence is taking power over somebody by emotionally manipulating them, by making perpetual demands of them, by eating away at their sense of well-being, by constantly saying negative things towards them, right? Yeah. One of the most rampant and virulent forms of feminine violence that is literally like eating away at the fabric of our society is what I call gossip. Mm-hmm. It is passive aggressive violence. When I talk about somebody who's not there in a negative light, and I don't represent the whole story, and I try to convince somebody, campaign with somebody that this other person who's not there is some sort of monster. And this happens with me in my community, and one person very specifically has been on a campaign for about a year now to convince everybody they talk to that I'm a narcissist, that I'm dangerous, that I just want to control everybody, and all these very fascinating sort of theories.
Well, you're a very handsome man, Joshua. So who knows what's available.
Hey, I'm
For those of you who aren't watching this, you guys should definitely pop on YouTube, because Joshua's in his essence in this moment. Let's just say.
Right? I mean, I'm a lot of mana, bro. Like, I'm unapologetically fucking 6'3". I'm a man. I love being a man. I fucking love being a man. Yeah. And I've spent a lot of my life in deep, deep study and practice of the arts of yin. That's right. The yin arts, the arts of listening, the arts of the subtle.
Yeah. And I both share that. I think, when I think of someone like me, I'm 6'5". I love being a man, and I'm a dancer, I'm an actor, I'm a writer, I'm a poet, I'm a musician. I'm also a martial artist. The beauty of being able to balance that. And again, why I was so excited to have you on here again is because you as someone that does bring a lot of balance, I trust your ability to sort of dive into these things as we're going to do today. And you bringing it back right to the gossip, the passive aggressive violence. The quintessential feminine on feminine violence is reputation savaging. I don't think I have to tell any women listening, to go back to high school, go back to middle school, and think about what that was like, and the way that women use that in the same way that men use physical bullying. It's the exact same equivalent in the emotional sphere than it is that we have more in the physical sphere.
And let's be super clear from the beginning that men do passive aggressive violence, and women fucking do physical violence. This is the story that we're going to tell today. Absolutely. Right? And so it's important to recognize that nobody's exempt from any kind of violence like this. Nobody's exempt in any way. We're all doing our best to protect the world from our own tendencies toward violence, which aren't our fault in the first place, because they were genetically inherited, culturally inherited, familial inherited, and inherited through whatever personal drama that you elected to come in here to take on in your lifetime. And you can consider yourself a victim of that, or you can consider yourself doing charity work to actually embody and experience the trauma that we are collectively here to transmute, move out of our cultural milieu.
Well, and how important is it too to look at the biological and anthropological influences of those patterns of behavior in men and women traditionally, but as you so astutely said, that men can also apply. I was an ace at passive aggression, man. That was like my MO when I was younger, because I was afraid to tell the truth, because I didn't want to create conflict. So I would side eye it in a different way. But it's like, we know this, for thousands of years, women needed to make sure that they were protected, that they were taken care of. And so they would often pit themselves against each other in a competition for masculine resources, for masculine protection, in the way that we know that men have a system of dominance and a system of hierarchy that exists around status, and how important it is for men to be the top dog, and how the way you are and the way you show up in those hierarchies in middle school and high school do affect the way you feel about yourself for the rest of your life sometimes. These are huge, huge patterns, and so important to utilize these things that we're going to talk about, like you've already mentioned, NVC, nonviolent communication, to be able to break those patterns, set ourselves free, examine our upbringings, and start to bring a true form of nonviolence to the world.
Absolutely, man. Don't even get me started on hierarchy, man. There's so many beautiful misgivings and misunderstandings about what actual hierarchy is. People have fucking forgotten that we're pack animals.
Yeah, man.
We are a pack species, and there is no animal that doesn't know who the alpha is in the pack. And the alpha is the one who is actually like genetically designed to be the leader of that pack. Yeah. And people don't envy the alpha. The alpha isn't the person with the most money in the pack. I'll tell you that right now.
That's right.
And so there's all this weird confusion because we have all this structural hierarchy where people with money in these certain roles in society are sort of like seen as the leader or the alpha. But I'm sure that you can acknowledge this in your own life. In many of the spaces I'm in, from a nature perspective, which the alpha is the most relaxed and alert male in the room. The alpha is the most relaxed and alert male in the room. He's relaxed because he's not on guard. He's not trying to prove anything. He's not trying to get anything done, but he's always alert and paying attention to any kind of threats to the harmony of the space, and will address those things openly if needed. Right? That's my definition of a true alpha male, and it's pheromonal. It's not even a behavioral thing. We smell each other before we ever even put any kind of label on each other. That's right? It's deep in our animal nature. We all know. And so we're living in this world where all the hierarchies are all fucked up, and the actual leaders, the actual alpha males, have been suppressed in society because they would actually be actively protecting society from the very harm that we're here to discuss. It's expressing itself in a societal level.
That's right. Yeah, the true alpha is agreed upon by the people. The true alpha emerges from the people, by the will of the people. Because they just know you're just the best for the job. We need whoever's the best for the job, and that serves everyone, and everyone benefits.
Yes,
everyone benefits.
Hierarchies of trust is what I like to call it.
I love that, man. I love that. Yeah, there's this whole thing now where it's like, and I think this is what I'm excited to get into today. Something I prefaced at the beginning, this idea of the unintended consequences of feminism that we're sort of seeing play out, and that every movement has its bright side, its light side, the benefits that it's brought, and every movement has its shadow and the darker aspects, the unintended consequences. And it's time to start examining how there are wonderful things about hierarchy, and there are challenges about hierarchy. There are wonderful things about feminism, and there are, as I know that you see in the men that you work with as well, Joshua, the demoralization that I see in so many men who have been raised with this idea that they are toxic, they are bad. This tenet of radical feminism that is the patriarchal theory, that patriarchy is the suppression of men as a group over women as a group. And that leaves no room for wiggle for the individual man to not be lumped into that. And so I know, I certainly have shared quite a bit of emasculation from that. That's why this podcast is called ReMasculation, not to put down the beautiful aspects of feminism and the beautiful aspects of our sisters and all these components, but to seek that balance again that I think you're so beautifully alluding to, Joshua.
Absolutely. And again, the moment we collapse into one or the other being right or wrong, we're lost. We're lost in duality, because life is this constant game of hypothesis, antithesis, synthesis. Life is this constant game of, okay, patriarchy life did a patriarchy experiment. Now life is doing a feminism experiment. And now we got to synthesize these experiments into the synarchy, which is that we lead together. We lead in harmony. We lead in a harmonious relationship, and everybody knows their role. Nobody's competing for relevance or some sort of like hierarchical structure. We're all just doing what we're best at and entrusted to do that well on behalf of the whole, right? It's that simple. And all of this like deep coding of competition, and there's not enough, this sense of deep scarcity that lives inside of every Westerner, that's been ingrained into us by an economy that has very carefully trained us to feel absolutely worthless and to secure a sense of worth by buying things and participating in that economy in ways that are,
Amen.
you know, we can get into the injustice of that economy, but just to say that we never end up there. We're not there. Capitalism isn't like the best thing that humanity will ever come up with as a way of sharing resources. It's just the current experiment, you know. And if we like question anybody who questions capitalism, then we're literally just cinching down on the possibility of evolving a more elegant system, right? And it's the same in any dimension of life. If we can't question feminism, if we can't question patriarchal, you know, a history of preferencing men in certain ways, if we can't really look at all these things and open our perspective, then we're never going to have a broad enough perspective to make to get a holistic sense of what's happening, and then to respond to it with healthy, holistically informed behaviors to be an agent of evolution and change, right? So
yeah,
that's the game. That's the infinite game.
How do you think we can start to do that more? How do you think we can educate ourselves, empower each other, start to recognize violence in its seed form, as you said? And
well, I think most of the violence that we all do, we do with our words. So one of the most important ways that I have cultivated ahimsa in my life, do no harm, this deep principle within the movements of Gandhi and King, and deeper than that down into the Vedas, this core principle of do no harm, ahimsa, is by identifying the violent behavior of my mind and my words, and learning how to express myself in a way that is fundamentally nonviolent. And the sort of core seed act of violence is when I judge you, when I decide that you are a narcissist, let's say. So I have a judgment now that encapsulates you as this negative stereotype. When I judge you in that way, it's this fine violation of your consent. I don't consent to being a narcissist. That's not who I am. I don't consent to being told what I am by anyone ever, right? And so, but when I form this opinion of you, then I create the basis to be able to do things to you that are also violent. Well, he's a narcissist, so that I can cuss in his face, and I can talk badly about him to other people because he's dangerous, and I can put him in jail because he's a danger to society, right? This label that we give people starts with a label, and that label either justifies violence or requires us to meet that person with empathy and humanity. And so, fuck, man, if you really want to become an agent of peace, then learn to distinguish between observations and the stories in your head. Learn to identify your own feelings and emotions so that you are not being just pumped by them and used by feelings. Learn how to identify your deeper needs, your core needs, what your actual needs are, that the need from where our feelings actually come. Our feelings don't come from out there into here. We don't have to fight anything to feel a different way. We have to come home, connect with our needs, and restore a sense of balance in our own feeling nature before we respond to life. Because if I just get hit with that feeling, have my trauma response, and then react from my trauma, I'm replicating trauma and violence of some form or another, whether it's mocking somebody or bombing them, you know, like it's a whole spectrum. And, you know, what we've been talking about is that we've constructed a society that has, you know, that pretends to say that bombing people and punching people with your fists and hurting people physically is wrong. It's violent. And if you do that, we're gonna punish you for that. But at the same time, a society that enables people to gossip, to judge, to cross boundaries in ways that are a violation of that person's sovereignty and sanctity, we make excuses for and enable all kinds of these subtler, more the feminine forms of violence, while we then mistake even somebody who just stands tall and says no, as dangerous or threatening, because now we have this weird cultural screen on that just frames all men as perpetrators and all women as victims, right? And so, the only way we're gonna unravel this is by getting clear in ourselves, committing ourselves to living in a nervous system that's actually at peace and only responds to the world from a state of peace, does not react to the world, does not react to whatever the stimulus is, but comes back to, thank you, I love you, and is an agent of the most beautiful possible outcome from right here where we are in this moment.
Yeah. I mean, where can people learn to do that, man? I mean, obviously the delta between where a lot of the world is, and maybe this is my judgment, right? Maybe this is my form of unintentional uh, challenge or violence, in the sense of where can people go to learn this? Because I mean, I remember I think I was 35 when I first encountered nonviolent communication, and I was like,
Yeah.
what the heck is this? This must have just come out like this year, right? This has to be brand new. No,
Right.
it's not. I think so much of the violence we encounter begins in the home, and where our parents were not taught how to understand their nervous systems, how to understand the words that they speak. And so we encounter these frames from mom and dad, or the people that were around as young people, which then imprints onto us, and then we go out there. But there are these tools that we can use. I remember being so both elated and furious that A, that this existed, and B, that I was only coming to it when I was 35. Because my
Right.
God, what would my home life have been like if we'd been learning about nonviolent communication in first grade? If I had been educated in how to talk to women in a healthy, nourishing way, the wheel of consent, or some of these other amazing tools that are out there from Barbara Brennan and the like, to be able to understand the power of the word, the logos, right? That initial, in all the religious traditions, the word, the word, the word.
Yep.
I love that you're pointing to that, man. Where can we steer our listeners to be able to start to educate and empower themselves in these forms?
Just go to masteryourbullshit.com, sign up for my newsletter, and you'll get a series of emails inbox for the next 2 weeks, breaking down bits and pieces of this system that I have, I had the absolute honor, pleasure, and good fortune to come across when I was 23 years old as a young father.
Right.
And if you want to see an example of a child who was raised with consent in our home, who was raised with empathy, who wasn't taught or trained or made to learn some form, because he absorbed adults who were embodying the principles of empathy rather than judgment, that were embodying the principles of natural consequences versus punitive justice. And he was honored. His consent was honored more than any child I've ever seen raised. And now, this kid is about to finish up his 3rd year at Stanford on a full ride. He's straddling his master's program, going into a master's in medical anthropology. And this is a kid who was unschooled through 8th grade, chose to go to high school because he wanted to have the high school experience. Told me, Dad, I'm probably just going to go get straight C's and then go to LA and act. And I was like, fuck yeah, that sounds like a great high school career. Have fun with it. And he, on his own, got absolutely lit up and graduated with a 4.6 GPA and like 1580 on his SAT and cracked into Stanford. So this is what can happen. And he's the absolute fucking most handsome, kind, loving, super respectful to women, emotionally intelligent, compassionate, committed to a better world young person I've ever met. Like he's the best thing I have ever gotten to participate in my life so far. Like being his father was the greatest sort of gift to me. But you point to something really important here, which is that our training in violating consent starts very young. Our parents didn't know better than to violate our consent, make us, hug Uncle Frank, even though he always groped me kind of weird, or make us, do things that we didn't want to do, make us go to school, there's all this force that happens. And then there's shaming. There's physical violence that there's like, do it under threat of physical violence in many homes. And there's definitely do it under threat of emotional violence in every home, even the best homes. And so this is like baked deep into us, this tendency to think that we have to navigate life by violating consent, but it's a valuable journey. And, I've spent years of my life cultivating the art of nonviolent communication and teaching it. I did a year-long master's program in 2005 called the Leadership Program in Nonviolent Communication. And that just, it transformed my whole world, because I realized that all karma is relationship, and that the most important thing for us to learn how to do is to navigate relationship in a healthy way. And that means that I stand in my 100% absolute crystal clear inner truth and sovereignty about who I am and what I desire. And I sensitize myself to the field and listen deeply to others and honor their sovereignty and free will as well. And if ever I'm going to apply any manner of force other than a simple open invitation to get somebody to do something that I want them to do, I better have some really fucking good reasons for doing that. And that force includes, like, emotional English and judging somebody for not wanting to do it, or trying to campaign or convince them to want to do what I want them to do, instead of just honoring, oh, cool, you don't want to do that. That's fine. Cool. So yeah, and we live in a society that coerces everybody, right? This is a whole, nobody works at McDonald's because they love being at McDonald's, bro. Nobody does most of the jobs that are being done because they love what they're doing. They do it because they're afraid if they don't, they're going to fucking starve, or their family's not going to have a roof over their head. This is systemic injustice.
Yeah, after they've been put through compulsory schooling that renders them essentially useless outside of their role in these systems that need worker bees. Yeah, a whole other conversation, my friend.
Truly.
Yeah.
But this piece comes up around, becoming an exquisite steward of our own boundaries. Because the victim doesn't set a boundary somewhere, often again and again and again. And then they tell a story that somebody did something to them when they actually consented all along the way with their body, at the very least, if not with their words and with their mind. They consented to that. And then then the victim wants to make themselves a victim of what they consented to, instead of taking full responsibility for what I chose to consent to, and for the boundaries I didn't set when I wish I would have. Now it's on this other person who should have known better than to do the thing that I didn't tell them not to do. In so many cases where there's a sense of victimization, right?
And obviously I just want to interject there, because I can obviously hear the voice of someone. Well, what about rape, Joshua? Are you telling me that that's something that they consented to, or this type of thing? Can you unpack that just a little bit more? Because I think I get where you're going with that, but I just want to kind of get more clarity on that.
Again, we're looking at a spectrum, right? Rape is a spectrum from some creep drags somebody into a car who's just walking down the road and violently rapes them, right? Like that. There's absolutely no question of a total violation of that person's consent. Their body was violated. Their everything was violated, right? And then we have what people call rape now, where people are like, I was in a 4-year-long relationship where I was raped repeatedly for years. And it's like, what? Like, what does that mean to you? Did you say, no, stop, don't do this, please stop? Did you physically try to remove this person from doing this to your body in some way? Because many of the stories that I've heard that are called rape are stories about women who who just didn't say no, and they maybe weren't enjoying it, but their body was actually joining the process, right? And this guy who, look, we all can use to can become better and more sensitized listeners to the body and to body language and to how the body expresses itself. This is the light of the feminine, the learning to become an exquisite listener and to not push back over the subtlest boundaries, right? But there are just so many examples where, and I just talked to a sister the other day who actually admitted that, this guy like kept pushing on her boundaries and he wanted to have sex with her and she didn't really want to have sex with him, and she finally did, and she felt horrible about it, and she had a boyfriend at the time. And so she like ended up telling the boyfriend that he raped her, but she's like, you know what? Like, I let him do it. I could have just said, get the fuck out of my house right now. At one point, do you not just stand up and say, fucking stop? Now, listen, we understand trauma, right? We understand that trauma and the freeze response and the fawn response, we understand that these things happen, right? But
and the freeze response being when something's happening to them and they're not able to say no because they're in a physiological freeze state.
Themselves do not be able to say no.
Yeah.
Nobody is ever not able to say no. Let's get that really fucking clear. You perceive that you're not able to say no. You close that down because you're afraid, right? You're afraid. But we're always able to say no. That's always actually an option. And this current of society, which enables people to believe that they don't have a choice.
Yeah.
The victim believes they didn't have a choice. When you have a choice. And I know that there are chemical conditions and reactions that are impinging upon your freedom in that moment, your absolute full, freedom. But we all have a choice. And this is the thing that pisses off the woke the most, to say, actually, no, like, we all do have a choice. We have to care for people. We have to teach people how to respond to their own trauma. We have to empower everybody to be able to say, no, stop, whenever they need to. We have to build a generation of people who know how to say stop when it doesn't feel right. But if we're on a first date and it's getting good and you're at my place and we're ending up, and maybe you said like, I don't really want to have sex tonight, but then we end up there and then it's happening. And then I'm feeling you and you're there and I'm not like forcing anything. And we end up having sex, and then later, when you never said, please stop, you never said, I'm not comfortable with this, you never pushed me away. In fact, you were participating and moaning and doing these things. And this didn't happen to me, but I'm just using this as an example because I know many men that it has. And then you're going to go the next day regretting having done that. And you're going to call it rape. You're going to say that your consent was violated. That is the ultimate form of violence. It is violence to then pin me as a rapist because you didn't set boundaries that you wish you would have. And that's a totally different experience than a lot of the rape that happens. And I don't mean to pretend that people don't get victimized, that people don't get harmed, that people's consent is not violated regularly, that women's consent is not regularly violated in this culture. Most of it happens in families while women are children, and men are children. I don't know about you. My consent was violated sexually when I was a young man. And so I know exactly what it's like to have to live with that knife in your nervous system and how to recover the ability to just fucking trust people again after having been violated by somebody who was a family friend he trusted completely, right? Like, I'm not saying this from the perspective of somebody who hasn't actually lived inside of like being drugged and violently had sex with, I am that person, and I wouldn't be who I am had I not had that experience. I wouldn't be who I am if I didn't know what it's like to have to unravel all of that in my life and to to not even remember it until I did remember it, and have my whole life like shattered by the remembering of it, and have to pick up all the pieces, you know. But this is important. A friend of mine said something really amazing. He was like, the first violence is a failure of nuance. And if we can't have a nuanced conversation about the spectrum of what we actually call rape in this culture, if we just have to turn everything, you know, into something, and not like, no, wait, let's slow down, let's take a breath, let's nuance this, and let's unpack and tease out some of the dimensions, the subtleties, because it's in the failure of nuance that we politicize things, and we become identity addicted. And I'm over identity politics. I'm over identity politics completely. And every time you hear something that challenges your perspective and you attack the person who's saying it, you are participating in identity politics.
Yeah, there's a great quote. I think it's Jake Chesterton. Tyranny is the deliberate removal of nuance.
Yes.
And
thank you.
This episode is sponsored and brought to you by One Golden Thread. The gold inside us is the thread that unites us. Conscious clothing for a more conscious humanity. Go to www.onegoldenthread.com to learn more. And here's a golden ticket for you. Use my personal code BATES11, that's B as in boy, ATES 11 at checkout for an 11% discount site-wide. OneGoldenThread.com. Get threaded. Yeah, it is very troubling to see that emerging, you know, from the left specifically right now in our country here in the United States, and very much from the political side of the aisle that raised me and that I very much emerged from. And it's very strange to see the refusal to even engage in conversation, the refusal to even engage in the, as we were talking about before the show, I'll say it this way: if we dispense with our willingness to presume someone's innocence first, I think we really head in a wrong direction. And I get it too. You know, the Me Too movement had some seriously important things to bring to the cultural mainframe, to bring up and sort of highlight the degree to which things have been happening for a very long time, especially within the halls of power. And now, you know, how. Okay, so the pendulum was one way. Now it's gone another. What else do we need to do here? Do we need to keep fighting amongst ourselves, or are we ready to actually start to bring the balance together, to start to talk to each other again, to start to listen to each other again, and be able to engage one another as individuals in each individual moment based on what's happening there, not just the dregs of the past that we're carrying with us. And I realize that's a big ask. I think, you know, you're one of the people that I feel like has sort of philosophized this farther down the line than a lot of people I hear talking about it, as far as ways to further your own ability to maintain, heal your nervous system, heal the past, heal your relationship to it, but also stand as a steward of the truth, of the ability to not be that passive person that witnesses violence being committed and just whips out a phone or runs the other direction, but takes personal responsibility for the community in each waking moment.
Yeah.
It's an important next step. I know you have a personal story that was sort of how this conversation with us began, Joshua, and I'm curious if it still feels relevant to sort of speak to that a bit, to sort of share your perspective. And
I think this whole sort of nuanced conversation is a perfect entree to that. And I just want to qualify something here, you know, for those who might be sort of upset by some of the things that I just said about rape. And just for context, before the Me Too movement came out, I was raising money to try to build an app that would be a confidential reporting app that would allow women to search men's names and to get very basic information about how many incidents of violations of consent were reported on this man in a given period. And this is how much I want to protect my community from serial violators of consent, because these guys just do it again and again and again. and they just move from community to community. And this matters. It's a big deal to me. And as you said, I spent a lot of time thinking about this, writing about this, teaching on this, and devoted my whole life to becoming an agent of something different. And I think the story that I'm going to tell is it really does require us to look with nuance and to take off the identity lenses for a moment and just see two human beings. Because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter who's doing the behavior. What matters is the behavior violent or not? If it's either love or it's fear. And if we're too involved with the identity of the person to just make a clear distinction between, that's actually fear, or it's violence, or whatever else, or it's love, then we're lost. We've got to stop seeing men or women or leaders or followers or all these things and just look at the behavior that's happening right now. And anybody who wants to know can feel and discern whether this behavior is coming from a place of like soft, open-hearted love and emotionally grounded power, or whether it's coming from some like agenda and some kind of like thing. If you stop lying to yourself, nobody can lie to you. So energy never lies. So this story I want to tell, not, at the risk of people who hear this podcast and know who I'm talking about, having a judgment of one of my former partners. I don't want anybody to judge my former partner in any way. This isn't about her. This is about a pattern that's replicating in relationships everywhere that's not being addressed. And it brings up things that I think we all need to look at in terms of our own prejudices and biases and our own sort of endemic ways of violating consent on a regular basis. And so I'm not the saint. I'm not a victim of what happened. She's not a perpetrator. We don't need a rescuer in any way. We certainly don't need anybody making any judgments of her or me in this situation. What I tell this story because it's just the most exquisite allegory for something that I think we're all needing to refine within ourselves to become the most exquisite stewards of our own sovereignty and our most meaningful relationships. And so let me set the scene. I'm cooking dinner one night. I love cooking for people. I was making one of my favorite kinds of soup. And at one point, I was cutting some carrots into the soup, and I cut my finger, and I was like, "Oh shit!" And I put my finger in my mouth to suck the blood out, and then, without even thinking about it, standing right next to my bro, I spit the blood into the soup. It was just like, it was instinctual, and I was like, ah, and he was like, "What the fuck was that?" I was like, I don't know, man. Like, sorry, dude. But it's a soup that's going to boil for another, 25 minutes. Like, nobody's going to come to harm from this thing that happened. It was just a weird thing that happened, right? So I forget about it. And my partner at the time and I sit down to watch In the Land of Hungry Goats, the Gabor Mate documentary on trauma, which I highly recommend to everybody listening. Please watch the documentary on trauma by Gabor Mate. And we sit down to watch this. Another piece of context here is that, unbeknownst to both of us, that night we were on the cusp of COVID. We had COVID. COVID was growing inside of our bodies, and the next day, we were about to break out in fever and have 10 days of hell. 10 days of like COVID hell, right? And neither of us are vaxxed. Neither of us had any interest in participating in that. And so that's just another piece. So we watched this movie, and then and it's really touching and deep, but it also can stir up trauma, right? Because you're seeing the stories of these traumatized people, and it stirs things up. And after we watched the movie, as we were getting ready to go to bed, I told, let's just call her Rose. I told Rose about this thing that I did in the kitchen with my finger. And she was like mortified and angry. She was like, why would you do that? And I was just like, well, I didn't mean to do that. It was just an accident. It was like a reflex. And she couldn't let it go. And she started interrogating me, and she was trying to get something out of me, some kind of admission out of me. And to frame this, we in our relationship have had an agreement that anytime the baseline emotional frequency of the space got above what felt totally easy and relaxed, either of us can ask for 5 deep breaths. Can we just pause and take 5 deep breaths? And the commitment is, yes, you take those 5 deep breaths together. Always. And if you can't take those 5 deep breaths, if you're invited to take 5 deep breaths and you can't, then the conversation is over until you can come back and take 5 deep breaths. Because if we can't take 5 deep breaths, if we can't do that basic thing, there's no way we're going to get any higher order processing done in a healthy way. In fact, we're most likely to just make matters worse. So this is the most fundamental agreement in my relationship. I recommend it to everybody. Please try it for a week.
Step away,
and see what
man. Yeah.
It's fucking powerful, because it's about pausing and it's about breathing, and it's not about breathing away things. It's about anchoring the feelings, being with what's coming up as feeling, and alchemizing it with awareness and breath, and synchronizing the with the other person, so that we have a better chance of staying connected through a difficult moment, right? So we have these practices built in. And my reflex is to take those breaths and to empathize. My work in life has been to cultivate the ability to just sit in the seat of the listener and hear whatever is coming at me as the experience of this other person, and to try to understand the feelings and the needs that they're expressing to me, and to get out of the stories that they have about it, or why they think I'm, the cause of their experience or whatever. Like, get out of the story and just be with this like vulnerable human expressing feelings and needs. So I spend a good 45 minutes trying to empathize with what's coming up for her.
45 minutes.
Yeah. Oh
okay.
Yeah, bro.
So clearly brought something up for her.
It brought something up, and she's agitated, and we do 5 deep breaths a few times. But she's still going for something. And to be honest, I don't remember exactly what she was wanting me to say, but it wasn't, she wanted me to say something to make her feel better, this thing. And it wasn't true for me. And I wouldn't say it. It's like, I'm not going to say this thing that's not true just so that you feel better about something here. I value the truth. I value my word, and I have a boundary here. And so at a certain point, I was like, hey, I've given everything that I have to this conversation, and I'm complete here. And she was not having it, and she wanted to continue the conversation. And I said, this conversation is over. I'm setting a boundary. I'm complete. If you are still feeling upset, I'd like to ask you to just take good care of yourself. And I'm happy to come back to this in the morning when we're both resourced. But it's late. And I know that if I push my resources right now, things are going to get worse, not better. So let's please pause this. And I lay down in bed, and she just won't stop. And I just repeatedly was like, I don't consent to this conversation. Please stop. I don't consent to this. And here's the thing where I didn't do anything to her. I told her a story about something I did that triggered this whole emotional reaction, this whole thing happening, right? But she felt like I owed her something here, and she was going to get that thing from me. She was running a trauma response. This isn't her soul talking. This isn't her highest self. And I knew that. I've dealt with this part of her enough in our relationship to know and to see that there's no finishing that spiral, right? There's only, I was like, I'm willing to hold you, willing to breathe with you. I'm not willing to talk to you anymore. please stop talking to me. She refused to accept being held or breathed with, and she just kept violating my boundary. And so she asked me to take 5 deep breaths, and I did. And then she finally shared the like vulnerable thing, which was that her mom had a blood disease. And
oh wow,
as a child, when her mom would cut herself, like her mom, there were multiple occasions where her mom would cut herself and her blood was all over the house, and her blood's toxic. And so it was like this whole trauma, and I get chills, and I want to cry, because like no child should have to be in an environment like that, where her mom is drunk and bleeding and like yelling, and it's just, it's like, of course it brought up all that trauma. And I was available to just hold her, but she still wouldn't put it down. And I said, please stop. I don't consent to this. And then she's like, well, you need to leave. You need to go into another room or another bed. You need to go. And we're living in a community where this is my only bed. This is my room. This half of the bed is literally the only legitimate place that I have. That's my place to lay my head. And I was not interested in going anywhere else. And for me, this was, so let's talk about consent for a second. By this point in the conversation, my consent had been violated 24 times. I said, please stop. I'm done. Please stop talking to me. All right. And then she wants to escalate the violence against my consent by telling me what I need to do with my body so she can feel better, instead of doing with her body what she needed to do to feel better. And finally, and this is after years of actually like similar scenarios resulting in me like leaving with my head down and being like, okay, fine. But this time I was like, fuck no. Like, your trauma doesn't get to boss me around. You don't get to tell me from this place what I do with my body. This is my bed, and I'm going to sleep here. And you don't have the right to talk to me or touch me while I'm trying to sleep in my bed against my consent. And so I go to the bathroom, I brush my teeth, I come back in to lie down, and she's lying corner to corner on the bed. And I'm like, hey, can you please move to your side of the bed? I'd like to lie down. She's like, no, you need to go somewhere else. And I was like, I'm not going somewhere else. So I get in the bed, I slide in, I get on my side. I can't, I have to be touching her to just be in the bed. And I'm like, I turn out the lights. I'm like, hey, will you please stop touching me? She's like, no, you need to leave. She's like, will you please just take your body away from mine? And I'm like crying at this point. I'm like, this is like, I'm just like, just constantly being violated. But it matters to me that I get to sleep in my own bed. It matters to me.
Was she angry? Was she like yelling? Was there any type of...
Oh, she was petulant. She was in a very petulant sort of like
almost like childlike.
vicious,
Yeah.
childlike state. And I was like, okay, after multiple requests for her to just stop touching my body and be on her side of the bed, I was like, I'm going to move your body slowly over to your side of the bed now. And I'm going to ask you, please don't resist. Just please go to your side of the bed. And I had my back to her. So I was like this. And I started just slow, like as little force as possible. This is 25 years of martial arts training and restraining people who are going crazy. I know my body, and I know how to apply just the right amount of force. So I apply a tiny bit, and she's resisting, and I'm giving a little more, and she's resisting, and a little more, and she's still resisting. And I'm like, man, like I don't want to do this. But I didn't jerk or like shove. I just slowly applied more and more force until she started sliding across the bed. At which point she turns around and starts kicking and punching me. So now it's dark. I've got this person kicking and punching my back while I'm trying to push her off of my side of the bed. And so in the dark, I turn around and restrain her. And I'm like, stop. And it turns out that in my restraining, I have a hand on her neck, and kind of, she's like pressed down against the wall in the bed. And she's like, get off of me. And I'm not choking her. As soon as I felt that, it was off there. But I was like, but I had to this is my hold on her right now. This is the only thing keeping her from kicking and punching me in this moment. I was like, if I let go, do you promise to stop kicking and punching? Like, I just want to keep us safe. Will you promise not to do that? She's like, okay, yes. So I let her go. She gets up and she's like, you attacked me. How dare you? You choked me. You know, all these things. And I'm like, I'm sorry. That was unintentional. I'm so sorry that I did that. Oh, I didn't mean to do that. I'm sorry to have hurt you. I didn't want to hurt you. We're sitting there. I turn the light on. We're sitting there talking. Two more minutes go by. And I was just like, can we please just put this to rest and go to bed? She just, out of nowhere, strikes me as hard as she can in the face. Boom. Mm-hmm. This is minutes after the like physical like intensity had already subsided. And I just looked at her with tears in my eyes. And I was like, you're going to regret that. That's just not the move. And I forgave her for doing it because I saw that she was like, literally, she's fucking demon possessed right now. She's possessed. She's possessed by trauma in this moment. I forgave her for it, but I knew that neither of us could escape the consequences of what she just did. And so,
did you leave? Did you stay? Did you what happened for you in that moment?
I
You just
stayed.
been punched in the face by a woman.
Yeah, I just looked her in the eye and I said, I hope that you're seeing what you're doing here. Can you see? You know, I didn't want anybody to be punished. I wanted light to shine in this darkness. And I wanted to go to bed in peace. And so one more time, I was like, I'm going to lie down in my bed now. We can process this in the morning. We don't have the resources to process this right now. I lie down, turn the light off again. I lie down under the covers with my head on my pillow. She starts talking to me again. I say, please stop. I do not consent to this conversation. At which point, she hits me as hard as she can in the face again, in the dark, while I'm under the blanket on my pillow. And at that point, I pop up and I turn on my light and I pick up my phone. I'm like, I'm going to call the fucking police. Like, what do I do here? And then I'm like, I don't believe in the police. I don't fucking call police. We resolve our issues. I'm like, I'm not going to call the police. I put my phone down. I walk to our door and I call out on our lanai because there are 3 other rooms within 25 feet of us with people in them.
Lanai and I say, like the porch, help. Right?
That's our porch area, our shared kind of living room, open porch area. And I'm like, please help, please help. I'm crying for help. I need help. And some of our house, our community mates come out. They're like, what's going on? And then they see that my face is fucked up. You know, I've got like marks on my face. That I'm like kind of.
Did she cut you? Were you bleeding?
She opened me up, but I wasn't like, there was no blood going. It was just more of like a raspberry kind of thing.
Sure.
And you know, we tell the story. They're like, you know, one of you should just go. And I'm like, well, I'm not going. I'm here to sleep in my bed. And she's like, I'm not going. So we committed.
She doesn't live there, right? Like she doesn't live with you.
She does. Yeah. We live there together.
Okay. But this is your bed. Okay. You guys share the bed.
This is our bed. But we share this bed.
Got it.
You know, and this is my half of the bed. Like if I have one place that's mine here, it's this, you know, this
you
half.
weren't willing to concede the territory. Yeah.
Right. Because, and then, so all of this happens and we go to bed, we get COVID. It's fucking gnarly. The next day we get up and we're just hammered. I do end up that day leaving our bedroom and going to another room on the property to stay because I could not be around this person. I felt my body just like was not safe around this person who didn't even apologize, didn't even say like, oh my God, I'm so sorry, like that was fucked up. Like in the moment she couldn't apologize. Later she would. But like let's just start with what we have here and look at like where the violence occurred. The violence occurred in the violation of the consent of somebody who refused repeatedly to continue engaging in a conversation that they no longer had the resources to engage in. Violence occurred when somebody demanded that the situation be made better by the other person instead of taking it upon herself to just remove herself from exposure to something that she didn't want to be exposed to. It escalated when she was in my side of the bed and touching my body against my consent and refusing to remove her contact from my body without my consent. It escalated again when there was resistance to me simply trying to move her out of my personal space. It accelerated again when she started kicking and punching me to stop me from putting her body on her side of the bed. And then, of course, the pièce de résistance, like unprovoked physical violence to my body.
That was then received by your community.
So then that's where this gets so interesting.
Yeah.
Right? Because when I told this story to my community, you know what they said to me? You should have just left. Why didn't you just leave? They weren't like, oh my God, bro. Like, that's really intense. I'm so sorry that happened to you. Like, Lillian, what do you have to say for yourself? The attention was on me and that I should have done something differently in that situation. And just like take a moment to reverse the genders in this story. Take a moment to reverse the genders in this story and ask yourself how that would have gone. And so, and after that, even people who had heard the whole story, Lillian and I telling the whole story, all the facts and details laid out in front of them, it was clear that they carried more of an enemy image of me and that I had violated something more than they carried that she had violated something. I became the dangerous person in the space somehow. Yeah. And it's just such a typical allegory for our culture that women's violence is fucking signed off on, while men who aren't even doing violence are fucking taken down at the hint that a woman feels violated by the way he looked at her or some shit. You know, this is insanity. It's a form of collective insanity that is just eating away at the heart of our culture.
I'd heard on a thank you for sharing that, man. And I agree. I'd heard on a podcast recently, and I'm been looking for the quote, but that women actually commit more physical violence in a relationship, but that men are, charges are pressed more against men because when men inflict physical violence, it usually leaves more of a mark.
And because men don't go talking about that shit.
Yeah.
Men aren't identified as victims, so they don't want to go use victim power the way that women are identified as victims and use victim power all the time to arrange circumstances to get what they want from people who aren't willing to give it already.
Right.
This is the definition of victim power. I am going to position myself in the narrative as a victim, whether I've actually been victimized or not. And it's okay to acknowledge when I've been victimized. That's important. But victim power positions me as a victim in a situation, then which entitles me to then extract from my perpetrator resources which they are not volunteering. This is the basic, and it happens within every relationship constantly. If I blame my partner for the way that I feel and then position myself as a victim of their behavior, and then I try to extract a behavior from them to make me feel better, I'm using victim power to extract, to violate their consent and extract something from them that they're just not already like freely and lovingly giving. And often before I even asked for it, often before I've even openly just said, hey, like, would you tell me 3 things you love about me? Or can I have a hug? Or it's like, instead of just asking, we're just primed to go to these violent strategies of extracting resources.
Yeah. You know? It reminds me, I don't know if you've ever come across the Karpman drama triangle, which is really fascinating tool. You bringing up NVC earlier made me think about it, and then obviously this piece, but it's the 3 pieces of the persecutor, the victim, and then the rescuer, and how all of those sort of pass the buck to each other and create violence in their own way, or in this case, what they call drama, but drama as conflict in its extreme force, becoming violent. It's such a fascinating thing, man, because I think we're obviously seeing this in the micro experience that you just described, pointing to the more macro experience that we're seeing, particularly from, as you mentioned, sort of the woke, the a certain side of the political aisle that is really doing a lot of work to cast themselves or cast other groups even as victims collectively. And I really have been having a hard time with that, because I'm not interested in any way in othering entire groups of people. You know, you mentioned MLK and Gandhi earlier. I'm very much of the belief that we must judge each other by the content of our character and not the color of our skin or our sex or our group identity. And when you start doing that, it's a very slippery slope to be able to just say all men are persecutors, all women are victims. It's a very dangerous place to be, and it does a lot of harm. Well, where do we take it from here as we sort of wrap up our conversation and sort of bring things back around potentially to where we started as a solution, or as more of a way that we can start to look at these things more objectively, taking each individual experience and each individual in the experience as their own. You talked to me about a certain brother who was being accused of certain things, and you were one of the only people that actually reached out to him to see what it was happening on his side of the equation too. So
well, you know, it's got a lot of layers to it. You know, what do we do about this? How do we become an agent of reconciliation and peace? Because every input, every action we take in regards to a conflict will either escalate that conflict or it will help to bring it down. And in the work that I've done in organizations, I don't talk about conflict resolution. I talk about conflict optimization. Every moment of conflict, every moment of friction is an opportunity for something new to happen, and for 2 people to learn and even become more intimate if you understand how to navigate and get to where the actual conflict is, which is never at the level of needs, as Marshall Rosenberg would say. Our needs, our actual needs, are never in conflict. Our strategies are what's in conflict in this moment, because there's always enough of everything that we actually need all the time, if we can learn how to strategize our way and collaborate and honor each other's free will. Because the moment, it doesn't matter what other needs are up, the moment you violate my free will, like we can end up in a power struggle very easily, even in the subtlest ways.
Yeah.
So we have to learn. I mean, empathy is the great panacea to all of this. The art of empathy, the art of listening to another person and trying to understand their experience from their perspective and how it was for them. Understand their needs, understand their feelings, understand what they were observing that might have brought this up. And when we can submit ourselves to this practice of listening, of not taking it personally, of not like loading up our response, but just like sit in the seat of the listener and try to understand someone, we have a much better chance of creating connection. We have a much better chance of humanizing the person in front of us and moving towards harmony. And
yeah, and being willing to sit with that nuance, right? I realized it wasn't Chesterton. I think it was what was his name? Albert Mayles that said tyranny is the deliberate removal of nuance. But to hone ourselves to the ability to stay with the nuance of a conversation, the nuances of the energies moving in our body. And I love, that prompt that you have of 5 breaths of creating structures within a relationship to be able to mitigate and account for the unavoidable challenges and disagreements that are going to come up as by nature, because you are learning, and we need other people to reflect us back to ourselves so that we can learn where we're off, we're missing something. And what a beautiful thing, I think, to bring it home to, in our ability to get curious in those moments instead of getting triggered, how to lean forward into that. I know that's a big part of my practice. My word of the day, my sort of Pee Wee Herman red alert that goes off in my brain when I start to get challenged in my relationships or even in traffic is like curiosity. Wonder what happened to this guy on his way to work this morning. Maybe his wife of 20 years told him that he's been cheating on him with his cousin. Who knows why someone is in that place? But instead of making it about me and collapsing into my rightness and their wrongness, it's like,
yeah,
hey man, that's no easy thing when you again have been bred in an environment of challenge, of violence, of
yep.
Yeah. But I think today, if we've accomplished anything, I hope it's to shed some more light. And again, this is not to paint women as the perpetrators in this case, but on that emotional violence that we all employ. Like you said, I love the way you said it, Joshua, the one that our culture, our entire culture is, I think, working to identify right now, what we're chewing on in this sort of political back and forth right now, of recognizing the power of, yes, physical violence. That's pretty clear because it hits you when it does, but the power of emotional violence as well. And I've been a big shit talker to myself most of my life, Joshua,
Right.
and my inner critic is a very, very dark person, very much personified in the voice and character of my high school basketball coach. And I was gifted a technique the other day where every time that I catch myself talking shit about myself in my head, I have to dig my fingernail into the cuticle of my thumb as hard as I can, so that I can make the connection of, oh, physical violence, that hurts, ouch. And emotional violence, we're in so many ways, I have not been attenuated to the result of the shit talking that I've had on myself, the negative self-talk. And so as a way to kind of connect the dots, I've found that very useful. But hey man, this has been a real pleasure to talk to you and riff on some things that I think are really important. I appreciate your vulnerability and sharing the story, and again, the care that you show in protecting her identity and just sort of letting this be something that we all get to learn from as a result of the challenge that you went through. So thank you for that and for your presence today.
Yeah, thank you, brother. And I want to say that at its very simplest, it comes back to valuing how I feel. And each of us has a birthright to just feel happy and at ease and relaxed and loving. Like that's our nature. That's human nature. Human nature is not destructive. Human nature is actually loving. It's generous. It's social. We love to give. We love to be a part of something. We love to belong. So when I put the way I feel as the highest priority in my life, then anytime I feel anything other than loving, that's a signal for me to come back to self-love, to not try to work on the world out there to get it to make me feel a different way, but to come back here, take those deep breaths, shake it out. Notice the thoughts, let the thoughts spin, be with the experience that's coming up, and love myself back home to my emotional grounding. before I take any action out there in the world, if or in my relationship or in my family or wherever it is, right? To the extent that we can all become masters of this and absolutely prioritize living at that baseline, then we have peace, we have harmony, we have delight, we have amazing sex, we have all the things, because it's about slowing down and dropping in together. And we can co-regulate and ask for the help that we need too, because we're not meant to regulate alone. It's actually not our design. We're designed to co-regulate. But in the absence of a voluntary a volunteering ally in co-regulation, we absolutely fundamentally have to learn to regulate our own breath first and foremost. The rest will follow.
Amen, brother. Thank you for your
Do
time
it.
today. You can find Joshua's stuff at www.masteryourbullshit.com. And yeah, we'll throw up your stuff too so other people can find you. And again, thank you for your time today. And thanks to our listeners for sticking it out with us. And hopefully it was useful. We'll see you guys next time. Thanks for joining us on ReMasculation.
Thank you, Michael.